Everybody must eat. Everybody must eat.
And that is where Meatball comes in the story.
A Star is Born.
A Star is Born.
So you're going to risk incarceration for mid-market athleisure wear?
River, I'm super offended by that as an aspiring yoga Montessori mom myself.
For $25 a month, you can access her content on OnlyFans.
River, that one's for you.
She seems to remember that, like, this is nominally because this cop got acquitted, and she's like, yeah, like, we want justice, as everyone's, like, storming the Lululemon store. Free meat is trending in Philly right now on Twitter.
All right, guys, welcome back to the pod. This week, you'll notice I'm in a brand new studio. I told you we're like taking a tour of the world. This is the first professional studio we're in. Don't get used to it. It's back to my bedroom next week. Special guest, Liz Wolfe, with us today. Liz is a staff writer at Reason. And is it staff writer at Reason?
I have no idea what my title is.
She's got some kind of
that out.
title at Reason. She's a writer. She's a great writer. She runs the Roundup, the Reason Roundup. A friend of mine. Can I talk about your baby?
Yeah, sure.
Conceived of her child. Can I talk about the conception of your child?
I mean, you can tell some of that, but I mean, hopefully you don't know too much about
I don't know
the
too
detail.
many of the details. I will tell you that she has a baby.
Suspiciously timed baby.
It's suspiciously timed to Hereticon. And that's, I'm not saying I'm responsible for Liz's child, but I'm responsible for Liz's child, and I feel it's like one of my proudest moments. There were 3 Hereticon babies, actually. 3.
Who was the third?
I just found out about. I don't know if I can say it. Actually, I don't know. He's not been public about it. But yeah, there are 3. His was a little less. His was not conceived at Hereticon. It was he reconnected with his ex at Hereticon, which led directly to the conception. And now, alas, they're no longer together, but they do have a baby. We should probably get into the actual podcast. So we've got a ton of topics this week. The very first one, I don't know quite what to call it. We're taking a look at Philadelphia, which is this kind of strangely not talked about dystopia in America. I mean, we talk about crime a lot. Philly is the worst in a lot of regards. And it kind of skates past the criticism that cities like New York and San Francisco get, I think because it's just a smaller city that people don't, care as much about. But it's a pretty big deal what's happening there. Sanjana is going to walk us through it. We're going to talk about the GOP debate, which happened last night. We are going to talk about probably immigration in the context of that, because it was a huge part of that debate. Liz is here to share her tedious libertarian perspective with us, and I'm sure we'll disagree a lot and probably agree on things like, for example, Dean Preston, who is the millionaire Marxist of San Francisco. Sanjana wrote a great piece about him. We're going to break the entire drama surrounding him and Elon Musk down, and then we're going to round it all out with a white pill, because America has seen the construction of some high-speed rail for the first time in I don't even know how long. Fortunately, River's here to tell us. He wrote a great piece about the Miami Brightline and sort of placed it in the context of the total failure that we've seen in California. This is of high-speed rail, right? So this is something that we talk about a lot on this podcast, something that I write about a lot, is the inability of, it seems like the inability of America to do stuff anymore, to build new infrastructure, to run new trains. This one is the Brightline, to me, feels like a cool sort of counterexample, and I want to get into that. I want to explain why it was possible in Florida, maybe speculate on why it's not possible in California. So let's just take it from the top with the actual decay and blight of the city of brotherly love. I'm sorry to say, Sanjana lives there. She did some touring of the carnage. I don't want to call it carnage. Some touring of the disaster area yesterday. I will just let you take it away. Break it down for us. What's going on in Philadelphia?
All right. So I guess the context for what happened a couple of days ago in Philadelphia is that in August, a police officer shot and killed a guy at a traffic stop who had a knife. And the district attorney in Philadelphia, a very progressive guy named Larry Krasner, brought charges against the police officer who was accused of killing this man. And 2 days ago, a judge decided to acquit him of all charges. And so there were protests at City Hall. Acquit the cop. Yeah, the guy died. And So there were protests at City Hall that were, by all accounts, pretty peaceful. And a couple hours after the protest dispersed, a bunch of masked, mainly teenagers, descended on the main shopping artery of Philadelphia. And this basically unleashed a night of looting on Walnut Street and then also on other retail corridors in the city. And that is where Meatball...
Everybody must eat. Everybody must eat.
A Star is Born.
A Star is Born and quickly incarcerated, it seems like. But Meatball is the alias of a woman named Deja Blackwell, who's 21 years old. She's an Instagram influencer who's got almost 200,000 followers. I also learned that she is on OnlyFans. So for $25 a month, you can access her content on OnlyFans.
Good to know.
25.
River, that one's for you.
25 is a little steep. Let's be. I mean,
you're not even a little curious. The masked bandit of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
She is a very enterprising woman. She also owns a beanie business, and she sells beanies for $50 a pop.
What, like Beanie Baby?
No, like
beanies. Like
oh, okay. I was going to say, so she's like a boomer Beanie Baby collector, $25 a month OnlyFans. Like,
no,
you say criminal, I say capitalist. So I say the spirit of America. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so anyway, so Meatball basically goes out on Tuesday night. She drives down to Center City and she's live streaming herself on Instagram. And it's like the whole story ended up being around like 30 minutes. And she basically live streams herself inciting a riot in Center City and in another area of the city where she's gathering a bunch of teens and she's filming herself the whole time. And she's like, which stores are we going to hit first? And then leads them to the Apple store. The teens break into the Apple store. Meatball's egging them on the entire time. There's like a video that she filmed where there's 2 security guards holding back the doors to the Apple store and like 30 teens pulling on the doors until they finally get in and they all start running out with like the new iPhones and iPads. She films them at the Lululemon store, like breaking in and stealing a bunch of shit. And then finally...
Lululemon is insane. I saw this video, okay? Why... So you're going to risk incarceration for mid-market athleisure wear? Like, I just don't understand. Like, you're like, I'm a thug who would, like, break into a retail location and steal shit. But also I want to dress like a yoga mom dropping off her kids at Montessori school.
Thing to me is like
it doesn't make sense to me.
It's the idea of wearing the Lululemon to, like, your yoga class the next day is just an interesting clash of worldviews.
You're like, I stole this at a race riot. Now I'm gonna do like sitting dog or whatever. Like, it's just it's insane.
I mean, River, I'm super offended by that as an aspiring yoga Montessori mom myself. But no, I do think that one like sort of like downplayed aspect in this, at least in how it works in New York City. I'm not sure how it works other places because obviously New York is the only city worth fucking paying attention to. Just kidding. But like, you know, there's organized crime rings that essentially lift these goods and then have a pretty sophisticated system for flipping them. So like, are we sure that these people are personally wearing the Lululemon sports bras, or is there some sort of like process by which they convert this into cold hard cash?
Which also brings me to my next question, which is it even... I don't believe that it was a race riot. I don't think that that's true. I think it was that was the catalyst, but we've seen this in every city not every city in the country. We've seen this in Chicago. We've seen this in San Francisco. We did see it in San Francisco, but a couple years ago. We've seen this in New York. And it seems a lot of the time to just kind of happen randomly. Social media sort of induced like looting.
It was not a race riot. I mean, it was... The clips from the night basically
it didn't
show
look like a riot. People looked happy, I thought.
Meatball people descending on
joyous.
Center City. And at one point in the video, Meatball sort of remembers, she seems to remember that like this is nominally because this cop got acquitted. And she's like, yeah, like we want justice, as everyone's like storming the Lululemon store. Yeah, and they also like looted a bunch of liquor stores in the city. That's how she got caught. So this is an important part of the story. Meatball has been booked and her mugshot is going viral. Tears are streaming down her face in the mugshot. But she got caught outside a liquor store. She has like a bottle of Hennessy in her hand and she's in the car and the cops pull up on her and they're like, you need to get out of the car. She's been charged with burglary, conspiracy, criminal trespass, riot, criminal mischief, criminal use of communication facility, which I think means like live streaming her riot. Yeah, receipt of stolen property, and disorderly conduct. So,
do we know the etymology of her nickname Meatball?
I think it refers. She's heavyset.
It's not a nickname of her own. This is a thing that's been put on her.
No, I think she also owns it. Like free meat is trending in Philly right now on Twitter, and she. I mean. Everyone,
Note to Ron DeSantis, embrace the Meatball nickname.
Yeah, like everyone I know in Philly knows, like all the young people I know in Philly know who she is and are like, free Meatball means something to them. So I think she embraced the nickname. Yeah.
This reminds me of a couple years ago, during, I forget which of the riots it was, but it was an actual sort of riot because there was a Molotov. And my rule for that is like, was there a Molotov cocktail involved? And there was in this case. It was these two like very like stereotypical like Lululemon type like white girls is my recollection of these events. Being interviewed by a reporter at one of these riots, and this girl just straight up casually tossed a Molotov cocktail into a cop car that was abandoned, lit it on fire. And the reporter is reporting and like favorably on what I think we were calling a protest at that point. And he was just like, even he was like, did you just throw a Molotov cocktail at a cop car? Like that seems crazy. And then she was arrested, and it was this very surreal, like, you realize that she had gotten caught up in this event that was, I think, much bigger than her. And she somehow lost track of like, I am a person in a society that has rules, and you can't light a cop car on fire, especially not in front of cameras and while talking to a reporter, and expect for there not to be something to happen. And with Meatball, it feels like I saw her weirdly, and I hope this doesn't make me sound too soft. I saw her picture crying. I felt bad for her. I felt like she didn't realize what she was doing was real, is what it really felt like. It felt like this really strong disconnect between the like Instagramification of reality and then like the consequences of, I was just live streaming crime and now I'm gonna maybe go to jail. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Am I being too soft?
Well, she's only 21. I mean, it's not an excuse, but she's really, really young. So there's an argument that like her brain's not fully formed, and yeah, she made a really stupid decision, a series of very stupid decisions.
I tend to slightly dislike that argument of like, because somebody's young and or their brain isn't fully formed, there's sort of possibly less culpability or more mercy. Like it's tough because there's a little bit of tension in how I look at this, because I think generally speaking, extending more mercy toward people as vis-a-vis their interactions with our criminal justice system is the ideal. But at the same time, I struggle with the fact that like, I'm sorry, but like in this country at 21, you can like lay down your life for the country in the military. You can legally consent to all kinds of contracts. And I think we need to like veer toward ideally greater consistency on that front in terms of what constitutes adulthood versus what doesn't. But I do think that there is maybe this almost like, what's the term for it? Like collective effervescence, like the feeling that people get when at a religious service or at a concert or whatever their form of like collective, like, communing spiritually with those around them and getting swept up in the moment. There is something to that. And I wonder whether we're seeing that in this like incredibly warped form via live streaming crime.
Yeah, I think it's like we can't change the rules for this person and for people like this who are caught up in the moment this way. Molotov cocktail girl, it's like, got to go to prison for that. But I couldn't help but think about this exact thing. Well, especially watching Meatball's sort of joyous narration of everything. You have 200,000. You mentioned you have 200,000 followers. In a moment like that, a lot of people are watching you. It's happening in real time. You're being egged on by everybody. And yeah, it's some crazy mob shit that, you know, it affects you. And this is the nature of social media, right? It like opens you up to that, sort of the bigger you become. There's a lot of, I mean, people talk about algorithm, audience capture rather. This feels like maybe a version of that where you kind of lose yourself to the crowd. I mean, again, like you did the crime, you gotta do the time potentially, but I do wonder if we have a bigger problem, and it's not even necessarily social decay in this case. Like, I wonder how much of this is actually social media.
I do think one of the interesting things with the like Lululemon girl Molotov cocktail case that you were citing, Mike, is like, it's funny because peak Me Too era, there was almost this like implication that like women don't really have capacity for evil. They are merely these feeble creatures that are so frequently duped and cajoled and persuaded. And then now it's interesting because with stuff like the Lululemon white girl throwing the Molotov cocktail, it's as if in that moment, in those types of scenarios, we are sort of waking up to like, actually, nope, every single person has great capacity for evil, including the seemingly innocuous yoga apparel bitch, right? Like, and I think that's sort of an interesting, weird full circle moment that we're in here. I think that's probably a better way of thinking about people as like, you know, everybody has capacity for, you know, rehabilitation and for evil and for good as well. But like, that's an interesting component to this. I almost wonder the degree to which it's a useful corrective, no longer letting, you know, certain demographics off scot-free.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying there was something sort of feminist about it, throwing the Molotov cocktail at the cop car.
No, I'm saying there's something feminist about the fact that like we're collectively repulsed by that and feel the need to lock somebody up for doing that, right? Like that's the way that it should be. No, I don't think it's very feminist to throw the Molotov cocktail.
It's also like, I mean, like the 1970s equivalent of Lululemon girl throwing a Molotov cocktail at a cop car was just like Bernardine Dorn like heading the Weather Underground and like blowing up buildings. Like Chelsea Boudin's mom, right? It's just like these like middle class, white, like stylish, kind of cool white people who are like doing
beanie.
Crazy shit.
River,
one
who was
of
the
his
one that was
4
brainwashed?
terrorist parents.
Yeah, right.
There was the one that was that claimed to be brainwashed. It was she like wore a beanie. She looked like a model. What was her name? No one?
In the Weather Underground?
I think she was in the Weather Underground. It was like a big part of, it's like a massive story in the early 70s, I believe. She gets kidnapped by these people.
Patty Hearst?
Yeah, that was the one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, she was kidnapped and it was like Stockholm Syndrome or whatever.
But she became like a part of the...
She was like a socialite. She was like the heiress of like a publishing empire. Her family owned like most of the newspapers in America.
All right. Sanjana, any final thoughts or important details of this story before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say that Philly's been going pretty viral on Twitter the past couple of days just because everyone's talking about the lawlessness there and the looting. But if you compare what happened 2 days ago to what happened in 2020, the scale of the destruction was much lower. Like I was walking, through Walnut Street yesterday, and it was really only the stores where Meatball was egging people on. It was the Apple Store, it was Foot Locker, it was Lululemon. And in 2020, they firebombed stores in Philadelphia. Like there's still the old Doc Martens store has now been turned into a beer garden because it was firebombed and burned down. And,
we live in the stupidest culture. It's so dumb.
And a running store that got looted is now like this yuppie bar. But, in 2020, the destruction was much greater. But I think, the city a few months ago paid out $10 million to protesters from 2020 that they tear gassed in the wake of, of George Floyd and everything. Whereas now you're seeing, 49 people were arrested last night, or something like 50 people were arrested.
I did notice it seemed like the reaction was very different. It seems like a kind of national vibe shift on crime, which is just much less tolerant of maybe things in general. I think people are feeling agitated. They are feeling like the world's a little bit too chaotic for them. They want some normalcy. We saw a lot of this last night at the GOP debate. Crime was a pretty big part of that. Liz, I know you were watching. What was your overall take of that? Like maybe let's narrow it down. Obviously, Trump wasn't there. So the whole thing to me feels kind of beside the point. He's leading by 60 points. There's no way he's not going to be the nomination unless he's jailed. And even then, he might still be the nomination. But if you were to sort of look at the candidates talking, and you were to break down their messaging to America, what do you think are the narratives that were really resonating, particularly when it comes to like crime and immigration?
Well, I think it was incredibly, like you said, farcical. Not only was Trump not present, but he also wasn't really mentioned. And I think on one hand, that could allow people theoretically on a debate stage to move on to more pressing issues. But that's not really what they did. And I think instead, it almost felt like this very conspicuous absence where, they don't need to fully define themselves in relation to Trump, but to some degree, they need to reckon with the fact that Trump is polling so far above them, and that there's a massive contingent of MAGA true blue diehards. And that felt like something like just the massive elephant in the room that nobody was really acknowledging. So I'm not really sure what use this served. I felt like I wasted my own time a little bit, which is actually amusingly something Ron DeSantis even mentioned in the post-game interviews, where he was like, if I'd been watching this at home, I probably would have turned it off. And it's like, you just told on yourself, right? Like, this is totally pointless. I think in terms of bigger narratives, there was a lot of, I would say, lip service paid to issues at the southern border. There was a lot of jumping from issues at the southern border to people are dying of fentanyl and there's a big overdose problem and there's a big crime problem. There wasn't necessarily very much, detail given. And I feel like some of the connective tissue that strings these issues together, which are admittedly related, was missing. So I felt a little bit like it was just kind of like, people are coming in at the border, fentanyl, homelessness. And it's like, okay, well, you need a little bit more teasing out not only how that is happening.
DeSantis said he was going to send the military into Mexico to take out the cartels. That seemed like a pretty direct, we need to stop this type comment.
Yeah, I mean, but this is something DeSantis repeatedly says and then never really, and I'm sorry this is wonky, but like never identifies the mechanism by which he would legally do that, right? Like he either misunderstands the actual power that he has, or he wants to like go to war with Mexico and invade, which like we should dissect that a little bit more if that is actually what he authentically believes we should be doing.
Yeah, I was like, are we declaring war? What exactly, how do you use the military in a foreign country and not declare war, I say, after 20 years, I guess, of doing that. So maybe that's a stupid question. We definitely have been doing that.
I mean, I guess you could like extra legally do this via like CIA assassinations, like return to Banana Republicville. But like, regardless, actually fleshing out the mechanism by which he intends to do this, I think would be useful. And honestly, ditto for things like Vivek Ramaswamy's comment about, revoking birthright citizenship for children of illegal immigrants and changing basically the way the United States treats birthright citizenship. Again, this is something that Vivek Ramaswamy has talked about a fair bit on the campaign trail, so none of this is really new at all. But the specific mechanism by which he means to accomplish this legally, I think, is of some significance.
Let's talk about the birthright thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, finish your thought, and then I do want to.
No, the only person who I think actually seemed tethered to reality was Nikki Haley, and I think the problem is that to some degree undermined her overall performance. She tried to fit so much detail in there, and I think it's pretty highly logical. But in doing so, the showmanship of it, I think, is missing. And I'm not sure how well that plays. I would honestly say Chris Christie had some very strong points.
Donald Duck?
Doing that, no one up here is going to call you Donald Trump anymore. We're going to call you Donald Duck.
All right.
We won't be calling you Donald Trump anymore. We'll be calling you Donald Duck.
Cringe.
That's a verbatim quote. That was
Chris Christie also was the one who made the crack about, how Biden is like sleeping with the teachers' unions, which is very awkward. And then Pence followed that up with like, I get laid too by a teacher.
It
and
was
it's like
such
everybody
a
needs to
weird.
stop.
It was such a weird foray into Pence's sex life. It was something that nobody asked for, nobody needed, nobody wanted. Why
also,
did it happen?
he doesn't fuck, right? Like, there's no way,
He calls his wife mother, which is a little. People just moved on from that. I wasn't able to, but others were.
All right. So on birthright citizenship, you were saying you're saying there's no legal mechanism for what Vivek proposed, which was I think revoking. What Vivek proposed was revoking birthright from people who I guess already have it. And birthright is like you cross the border, you have a kid, the kid is automatically an American citizen. That did seem to me kind of great. Like, I don't know how you can revoke someone's citizenship. However, the idea of getting rid of birthrights moving forward, it feels like pretty normal, actually. Most countries in the world don't. I think very few countries in the world have some kind of birthright citizenship. If I were to go to Spain and have a kid, the kid would not be Spanish unless I had the kid with a Spanish woman. So what is so controversial about that?
I mean, I think the challenge is like we have constitutional issues here. Like 14th Amendment is pretty.
That was the slave one, though, right?
What's that?
Wasn't that this? This is what Scott was saying. He was like, no, this is a slave amendment. It has nothing to do with immigration.
I mean, that's not how it has traditionally been legally interpreted. I mean, I'm not a legal scholar, but Ilya Salmon over at Vol Conspiracy definitely covers this a fair amount. And there's like, I think the case is here. I'm trying to look up the case now so I can point you in the right direction. I think it's United States v. Wong Kim Ark. And basically it affirmed that people born on U.S. soil, with the exception of like foreign diplomats, I think like, that's one exception. Soldiers of invading armies don't get the ability to just give birthright citizenship to their children, which I think makes a lot of sense. But people are all afforded citizenship by the 14th Amendment. This is historically how the Supreme Court has interpreted this. We have pretty longstanding precedent on that. And I think Vivek maybe downplays the degree to which this would be a very hard thing to change constitutionally. So, I mean, yeah, maybe it's an interesting policy discussion to have, but I think if he actually wants to be the executive, making sure that the policies he's proposing pass constitutional muster is sort of a useful prerequisite.
In countries where there isn't birthright citizenship, you do have issues sometimes where you have people who are like in the country illegally or whatever, and then they have children, and then those children are basically stateless because the laws in their own country don't allow someone who's like not there or whatever. Like there's like all these issues that can arise from that where you could end up with people who just like we don't even know where to send them, right? Like there was for instance, there was like what would you do about like abandoned children? Like somebody like finds a baby in the woods. I mean, this like stuff sort of happens. It's like you don't know who their parents were. So it's like, are they U.S. citizens? Like what country do they belong to?
Right. I mean, how is it handled in Europe?
Border Control found a baby at the border earlier this week. They don't know where this baby is from. I assume that it will be like adopted out and be given some sort of like revised thing and like made a U.S. like birth certificate and made a U.S. citizen, because like I mean we literally don't know what country this baby is from. We can't deport it. I don't know if you can deport a baby anyway, but like you definitely can't deport one to just a random country and be like, we think this one might be Guatemalan. Could you take it? Like So I mean I think there are like a lot of like human tragedies that could arise from us getting rid of birthright citizenship with this level of like chaotic immigration.
Like you have to weigh that against the fact that right now we have an obvious massive incentive to just cross and have a child and declare them citizen. I also don't understand why a foreign diplomat who has a kid here is any different than someone crossing the border illegally and having a kid here. What like, and I'm not even saying neither should be a citizen, but why wouldn't the foreign diplomat's kid be a citizen? I don't understand that distinction at all. And I wonder what would happen actually with this court if something were to be taken to them, because if you were to ask me 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if Roe v. Wade would ever go away, I would have said definitely not. That seemed unthinkable to me. And yet here we are.
Well, the thing that I think is so interesting about the foreign-born citizenship question, or the when nationals of other countries come to the United States and have essentially an anchor baby, is this is such a weird thing to fixate on in terms of like how to fix the crisis at the southern border. Like if the question that the moderators pose is what to do about the massive influx of people that has just absolutely surged under the Biden administration attempting to cross the southern border, not typically just Mexicans. We have Venezuelans, we have people from the Middle East, we have people really coming from all over the world and fleeing across, attempting to seek asylum at ports of entry. And the thing that I think is so fascinating right now is this has been what's been going on for quite a while. And then there are all of these sort of so-called sanctuary cities in the United States, cities I think that we all live in and have a lot of familiarity with, like
the one that you said is the only one that matters, I believe.
Yeah, New York, exactly. But it's absolutely crazy. Like they essentially have a law on the books in New York City, I think passed in the 80s, that makes it so that they are supposed to provide refuge, shelter, food, service, social services to anybody who comes here. I'm sorry, but now you have this problem where literally New York's governor, Kathy Hochul, is saying, don't come here. And they're distributing flyers in Spanish to these people saying, New York is full. There's this crazy
They didn't just say that.
tension at the heart.
They said go to more affordable cities with
go to San
arrows
Francisco.
pointing to different cities, including San Francisco. That's the crazy shit to me. I think.
Well, it's hard for I'm not sure whether they were pointing to specific cities or whether the graphic design of it was just like literally anywhere. Like please,
anywhere else.
Go anywhere else.
Please, God, do not come.
There's an interesting thing here that I think is
do not come. Do not come.
I'm gonna come.
relevant to so many of the themes that like you explore all the time at Pirate Wires, which is, well, a bunch of like do-gooder leftists who live in San Francisco or live in New York or live in Los Angeles claim that they just want to constantly let as many immigrants in as possible. And then they run into this huge problem where it's like, well, actually, how do we accommodate this? You want that, and you simultaneously want a massive social safety net. You want a massive welfare state. And literally New York is in this situation where Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul are saying, we don't have the means to support this anymore. And I think this is actually like, we're seeing this moment where a bunch of far leftist policies are collapsing on crime and what, you know, as it pertains to sanctuary cities and the welfare state. And to me, it kind of seems like this is fertile territory for people seeking the Republican nomination to go after. So like, why didn't they? Why did they leave this on the table?
Wait, which part did they leave on the table? They definitely
talking about the fact that like, what a crazy damning indictment of New York's policies for New York to say we're a sanctuary city, but no, actually, JK, we're full, don't come here.
I mean, I think that was maybe just a debate. They were really trying to pack a lot in there. I've definitely heard them go after New York quite a bit on this issue. I'm curious how you think about it as a libertarian, because I was, libertarian for many years. I think that's still to some degree my true north. I think in a perfect world, et cetera, I'm freedom oriented for sure. I want to maximize that as much as possible. However, we live in a society and it has a lot of structure in place already. One of the things in place is a massive and increasingly large social welfare state, as you just mentioned. Libertarians sort of famously open border way before the left was doing it. The libertarians were on top of it. I was this literal open border guy 10 years ago. But then I had to face the fact that we were very close to getting that policy. In fact, we had already had it to some extent, but there was no way we were ever going to get rid of the social welfare state, which I've even kind of changed my opinion on as the years have gone. But you can't have both. Like you can't have open borders and a welfare state without destroying the country. It seems to me like that just seems like straight logic. Like we don't have the money to pay out every person on the planet who moves here. How do you think about that as a libertarian?
Well, what do you mean by open borders?
So, I mean, the classic libertarian approach is free markets, like a free country is a literally open border. So, sort of move on in and everyone's welcome. There are no quotas. Anyone who comes here can come here and build. So
sort of like the U.S. pre, 1850s or so.
So sure, but this is, the population of the planet's like 7+ billion now, and we have a massive welfare state.
I'm not saying that that's aspirational. I'm just saying, so this is actually a huge pet peeve of mine. I think libertarians use the term open borders sort of like at their own peril, and they end up sort of undermining their case a lot of the times. I think there's definitely a time and a place to do our like wonky libertarian, like aspirational open borders, free movement of people and goods across borders. Like that is something that I fundamentally want and value. But I think it's important to remain realistic and tethered to reality. And the way I would frame my own personal immigration beliefs is, the fact that we have such long waiting lists for both low-skilled and seasonal workers and also high-skilled workers attempting to come into this country to work and study. The fact that in some cases, if you're an Indian applying for, you're educated, you went to IIT and you're applying for a visa, you might be waiting for 10 years to come and work at a tech firm in this country. To me, that's a travesty. And that's an example of like a relatively reasonable wait list. What I see as the ideal is drastically increasing the number of visas that we hand out to people in a whole bunch of different categories. I think the fact that we experience such We're experiencing shortages of pilots right now. We're experiencing physician shortages. We're also then experiencing like childcare sector worker shortages. And I know that sometimes this makes leftists super pissed off, but fundamentally, I want the ability to like find a nanny for my son and, you know, maybe pay below market rate for New York nanny world. And you know what? There's a whole bunch of Venezuelans who want to flee socialism, who want to come here and work for slightly below current market rate for me. And I want the ability to make that deal.
Speaking of pissed off leftists, we do have a Bernie bro in the chat with us. River, what is your response to Liz?
I mean, I think that there's libertarians are like love talking about like markets and supply and demand, but then like all of a sudden when it comes to the labor market and immigration, they're like, there is no supply and demand. Like demand, like the supply is not going to like lower the price of labor. It's just not like it's this insane thing where and the left is like basically doing this now too. Like, I mean, Angela Nagel basically who wrote Kill All Normies. She basically got kicked out of the left and called a fascist for writing in American Affairs an article that basically said like it is a leftist position to restrict immigration because it hurts the working class, it lowers wages, it hurts union density. And like I think all of that's true. Like there are plenty of studies that show that mass immigration of the kind we're like seeing at the southern border, so like, you know, mostly lower skilled, like fairly uneducated workers, it hurts working class wages, particularly in the Black community. And yeah. I just feel like that's completely ignored. It's like they're like, well, what if we pretend that everyone is like actually starting a small business and not?
No, I own the consequences that you're describing. I think they are by and large correct. First of all, I think that there are, in terms of labor market, I think supply and demand absolutely does exist. The problem is like the labor market's so currently distorted by minimum wage laws, but also restrictions on immigration. But the consequences that you're talking about related to displacement and how much this might hurt the working class, I think you're right. And I think libertarians need to do a better job of owning the fact that there will be those consequences. I also think actually sometimes people on the right wing, when they talk about the possible influx of crime and criminals and increased cartel activity and stuff, I think that actually libertarians would be intelligent to pay a little bit more attention to what they're talking about and to maybe support some of the vetting processes that they're seeking. To some degree, like I think being overrun by, you know, cartels would be a very bad thing, and I don't think it should be that controversial of a statement to say. No, but yeah, to some degree.
I love it because
I mean, I
libertarian. You're the moderate libertarian, and you're like,
I should make a full-throated endorsement of like, I think it's fine to vet people to make sure they're not absolutely insane murderers who are flooding across our borders. And I think the fact that some of my countrymen in Camp Libertarian fail to admit that, I think is a big problem. I mean, really, the fact of the matter is like there are negative consequences that come with drastically increased immigration. I own those consequences, and I think the net good, it's still a net good. And I think we can kind of look to Canada. I mean, the U.S. foreign-born population is what, 12%? Canada has like 24%. Canada hasn't fallen to become a total shit show, though obviously Justin Trudeau is attempting to pull it there.
No one here wants to be Canada.
I don't know about that.
Not on this podcast. Let us I mean, we've written extensively on the clown car that we call Canada.
I want like a crypto heaven, crypto and immigration heaven where no Justin Trudeau type losers ever get elevated to public office. So that's like my Canadian American vision.
Okay. My Canadian American vision is that's where we keep our resources. They have a fake government that we pretend exists until we need stuff from Canada, and then it's ours. That is my vision for Canada, and they don't get a vote. I do want to talk about, so on the immigration thing, and I'm kidding, by the way, don't come for me. I don't really want to enslave the Canadians. Like, they're basically us. I just am playing. On immigration and bad governance, and sanctuary cities, one city so far that has escaped more or less unscathed from the migration, I don't know how long it can last actually, has been San Francisco. And San Francisco has some pretty funny policies in this regard. I remember years ago before COVID, I would take the bus home from work and it would pass a facility. I think it was like a homeless center. Maybe it wasn't a homeless center. There was certainly a church and then like something next to it that felt like a social center of some kind. and it had a giant banner outside that said "Immigrants Welcome," and it's a beautiful sentiment. I think it had something to, you might have mentioned the sanctuary city component, which was very in vogue at the time under the Donald Trump presidency. And outside on the steps were maybe 20 homeless people sleeping. And it was like that every single day that I drove past. And it just kind of, for me, really highlights the politics of San Francisco. This pageantry of goodness and this absolute decay. Like, if you have room for immigrants, how do you not have room for the people who live here? Why are they sleeping on the street? Why is that not our priority, right? Like, stuff like this, we talk about it a lot. I think one of the central characters in this entire drama of San Francisco is a man named Dean Preston, who I refer to often as the millionaire Marxist. Sanjana just wrote a great profile of the man. He's on the board of supervisors. Take it away.
Yeah. Well, before I get into Dean, I just want to say I don't know if San Francisco has actually escaped the wave of immigration, because like 90% of their fentanyl dealers are from Honduras. But that's an aside. That's an aside for later. Yeah, Dean Preston, as you said, he's a member of the Board of Supervisors, which is like San Francisco City Council. It's a very powerful legislative body in the city, and each supervisor represents a different district. So Dean represents District 5, which is a very heterogeneous cross-section of San Francisco. It includes neighborhoods like the Haight-Ashbury and Japantown, and it also includes poor neighborhoods like the Western Addition, and since last year, the Tenderloin, which is a very infamous part of San Francisco, known for its open-air drug markets, lots of homelessness, and some of the most depraved scenes that you can see on the streets of America, unfortunately, in this day and age. So Dean's responsible for those neighborhoods. I think a good line to sort of summarize who he is for someone who's not familiar with him is he's the city's only openly democratic socialist legislator. And he's also a multimillionaire who, according to public records, has at least like $4 million in stock at Apple, Cisco, IBM, and Microsoft, despite his claim that capitalism is the root of all evil and we need to combat the parasitic 1%. He owns a $3.4 million house in Alamo Square, which is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in San Francisco. He has a house in Long Island. He and his wife have bought and sold hundreds of acres of property in Mendocino County up in the North Bay. And he's a trust fund baby. He grew up in Greenwich Village in a co-op building that his parents owned. He went to Bowdoin and then UC Hastings, and has done like public interest law for his career before getting into politics. And he brands himself as an advocate for the poor and dispossessed, but his voting record shows that he's basically the opposite. He's been one of the most consistent opponents of affordable housing in San Francisco. So San Francisco has some of the most restrictive zoning laws in the country, which make it like very, very difficult to build anything there. And Dean has been a big proponent of entrenching those restrictive of zoning laws, and he's blocked like almost 50,000 proposed affordable housing
in general. He comes at it from this perspective where he says, it's not that I don't want housing, I just don't want housing for the rich. But of course, the city has essentially prohibited the construction of housing to such a degree and made it so hard that the only way to build housing that actually turns a profit is to build these giant fucking loser condos for rich people. That this is the system they created. And then they're like, no, we can't build those. So that leaves us with nothing. And that is what the track record of people like Dean is just a constant blocking of housing. And so, yeah, we have a
and he also blocks housing in these very covert, ostensibly progressive ways. So there was a very infamous case at a site called The Hub in San Francisco, which they wanted to rezone for affordable housing. It's basically just a bunch of like abandoned parking lots where like people were using drugs and shit. And Dean got word of this apparently from an angry resident in this neighborhood who didn't want affordable housing being built. And he asked for an equity study to be done, which in a city like San Francisco, when you ask for, an equity study or an environmental study, that's basically code for like, shut this shit down for the next decade. And the equity study, it was like 5 or 6 years later, still hadn't really gotten off the ground. It was maybe 2 or 3 years later, but years later, it hadn't got off the ground. and construction still hasn't really taken off at the hub. So it's that kind of.
The profile was really well timed because he just got into a huge controversy online he was massively ratioed after he suggested the solution to the car break-in problem in San Francisco was to convince San Franciscans to stop leaving things in their car. I mean, I received some pushback for criticizing this. People are like, of course you shouldn't leave things in your car. And it's like, I guess that's true, but also the bigger thing here is we need to do something about the people breaking into cars. And I think that is the core thing that has animated people in this sort of anti-Dean Preston wave. This is what has brought people from all political stripes together. I think everybody's over the sort of widespread decay of basic civility, and yet Elon Musk suggesting that he was going to give some money to the anti-Dean Preston campaign seems to have galvanized the left. Liz, did you follow this at all, and what do you make of it?
Well, I think it's just a classic Nepo baby move to have gone to Bowdoin, right? Like this like bougie douchebag liberal arts school in Maine where they do like these fucking like lobster feasts every semester. Like I hate that all the mental imagery that this brings up is horrible. No, I mean, this is a classic tale in San Francisco. I think it's crazy to me, even though this story about how people like Dean Preston block housing, even though, it gets reported by people like you guys, and we do a lot of this at Reason, it's stunning to me that there is still this entire contingent of people who don't see with any sort of clarity the relationship between things like CEQA and environmental review laws and these equity studies, and the fact that housing ends up being very expensive, not just for poor people, not just for rich people, literally for everyone. I mean, you look at the median price of a home in San Francisco, isn't it like 1.2 million?
For a one bedroom.
Something like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a home, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's like stunning to me. And I live in New York City, which is a notoriously, warped and awful housing market as well. But the fact that like San Francisco is eye-popping even when that's my standard of comparison is just, I mean, it's so clear that in so many of these big cities, in LA, in San Francisco, in New York, we have totally distorted the housing markets and made it so that essentially you are creating this sameness. You're creating this pajama class of upper middle class laptop workers who are the only people who can really afford to live there. And so like say goodbye to like the Lou Reed bohemian days or all of the like hippies in the 70s who used to live in San Francisco who made it an interesting place. It's really becoming closed off to them. But obviously, like the main problem with this is that you make it so that like poor people don't have any place to go. And then they use all of these top-down solutions to attempt to engineer a solution to this problem at like, when building new construction, forcing developers to set aside a certain number of units that are income restricted to cater to the poor. Okay, I'm sorry, but you're just distorting the housing market further instead of actually fixing the underlying issue.
Yeah, and it's just crazy that it's all in service. The rhetoric is in service of this LARP for the working people who can't afford to live in your city because of your policies, and it seems like it still resonates with people. So Elon Musk, by entering the debate online, so the local politics people went nuts when Dean said the car break-in thing. Dean Preston enters. Or Elon Musk enters the conversation. He says, I'm going to give some money to the anti-Dean Preston campaign. And Dean manages to flip that around and use it in his favor because he is LARPing as this hardcore Marxist who's like in it for the people. And he's, in it for the working class. Again, the working class that does not, San Francisco is a land of nonprofits who say they're helping the homeless and don't, and rich tech workers. That is kind of what, and then landlords, people who've existed there forever because of the tax codes. That's what you have in San Francisco. He turns this around and is like, I am being attacked by the billionaires. And it seems to be working in his favor. What do you guys make of that? River, did you follow that at all? And I mean, it seems like you should naturally.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I mean, there's this whole like lineage. It's of like rich communist space. I mean, Frederick Ingalls owned a factory in Scotland. Like, I mean, this goes all the way back to the beginning. You had in Laos, like a prince led the communist revolution. Of course, again, the Weather Underground, mostly like upper middle class white kids. It's it's all like a LARP, and like it doesn't. I mean, not always. I mean, say what you will about Stalin. At least he grew up poor, you know. But I mean, Stalin also wouldn't have said that.
Bowden,
like,
damn it.
Right. And
Yeah,
by the
really
way,
walks
Stalin
the
wouldn't have
walk.
told you to lock up your car. Like you know, they had, say what you will about like Stalinist Russia. Like if you stole
Gotta hand
something,
it
like
to
you were going to the gulag, they would lock you up. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting in Dean Preston's case because he's actually like serving his own interests as a millionaire in San Francisco through all these laws, but he's able to cast the pursuit of his own like class interests as the pursuit of the class interests of the working class, which again like barely exists in San Francisco. So I mean, there's like an irony to that, and also whenever I see people with like Dean Preston money fighting with people with Elon Musk money, I'm like, neither one of you have to like work a day in your lives ever again, and your kids probably won't ever have to either. So like, just you people, like it doesn't matter. Like, you know what I mean? It's like there's no meaningful distinction between a multi-millionaire and a multi-billionaire in terms of like, do you actually have to worry about any economic issue personally in your life? And like the answer is usually no.
So clear that nobody hates a billionaire more than a millionaire. They're the ones who are talking about it. You see this. You see this in the actor strike. Who is that? It was the two girls on that like sort of wonky HBO show, and they were like, or the wacky. They were like super into Hillary Clinton and. What was
Broad City?
Yes. What is the girl with the curlier hair? That actress,
Ilana
Glazer.
So that girl's going off about the billionaires and sort of characterizing them as they're like the billionaires are really they are enslaving us. She's using really aggressive language, and she uses, for example, Matt Damon. That was like she's like even people like Matt Damon, and I thought like, Matt Damon is not oppressed. What are we talking about here? This is crazy. Like this is just intra-rich warfare. I don't care about this. I refuse to care.
This reminds me a little bit of the very recent AOC soundbite, which for whatever reason I don't think people paid that much attention to, where she was taken to task by an interviewer, for having a Tesla, for having the Tesla be the electric vehicle she bought, as opposed to something union made and American made.
No, our car was purchased during the pandemic when before a vaccine had come out. So travel between New York and Washington, the safest way that we had determined was an EV, but that was prior to some of the new models coming out on the market that had the range available. But we're actually looking into trading in our car now.
And she was so hilarious because she responded in like the sort of classic, like the sort of leftist, like, well, actually, let me educate you type way. And she's like, well, this is really what served our needs at the time because the range was much better. But actually, we're looking into swapping it out because we do really want to like live our values. And it's like, you're full of shit. And also you just told on yourself because the Tesla, the range was better. Oh, you mean that this non-union made car is superior than other things on the market. Your revealed preferences are kind of the same as a whole bunch of other people's, and you're just such an elitist, right? Like, at least pretend a little bit better to be this like Bronx working class girl. Bronx working class girls don't have Teslas, lady. Like,
they also don't go to the Met Gala in a fancy dress. Right? Like, come on, the Eat the Rich dress. I will never fucking forget that dress.
It's an incredible grift, and she's done a great job. Honestly, I will curry favor with River over here and hand it to Bernie. At least Bernie, you got to hand it to Stalin, and you got to hand it to Bernie. At least he like was terribly lazy and sort of like impoverished, sitting in like a little one-room cottage in Vermont for a gazillion years with like a mattress on the floor. He was literally like a mattress on the floor, bro, until he was like 40.
Yeah,
so I do at least
authentically a poor loser, and we love that about him. I want to talk about some of their policy, though, in the context specifically of actual public goods. So transit. River, you just wrote a fantastic piece. I encourage everyone to read it on the Brightline in Florida, which is it's barely high-speed rail, but it constitutes as high-speed rail that is now connecting Miami to Orlando, sort of. It seems like bucking the trend of Americans not being able to build new infrastructure. You placed it or talked about it in the context of California's high-speed rail disaster. Do you want to just break that down for us?
Sure. So California high-speed rail project was voters approved that in 2008. It's been 15 years. They spent $9.8 billion and not 1 mile of track has been laid. So this gave people the impression that like America just can't build high-speed rail. Like they're like, that's in headlines. America can't build high-speed rail. Why America can't build high-speed rail? And really what people meant is California can't build high-speed rail. They're really the only ones doing it. The Brightline, which is a private company in Florida, they recently finished a connection between Miami and Orlando. So now Florida and a private company have created something that California could not. That said, the Brightline went $4 billion over budget and took 9 years longer than they said it was going to. So it's not exactly like it's a success in that it exists. And so success in comparison to California. Like under any other circumstances, people would be like, wow, you went way over budget and also took years longer than you expected it to. That doesn't sound great. But it's the standards, the bar has been lowered so much by California that like even this thing that took forever to build and was way more expensive is a success. And so I go through all of the reasons why this could be, and you could argue that the free market has something to do with it. Brightline had obligations to its private investors, its bondholders, to actually finish the project, whereas California, I guess, can just lie to people and say that it's going to be built forever. But really, I think that it's incompetence. Like our government has built big infrastructure projects. Most countries that have high-speed rail, those systems have been built by the government. For instance, in France, their national rail is nationalized. It's was built by the government. It's run by the government. And the French advisors who came in and were advising California on their high-speed rail project, and they got pissed off eventually and left and said that they were going to North Africa because it was less politically dysfunctional. And then they helped Morocco build a high-speed rail system in like a matter of a couple of years. Essentially, what California's problem is that they have embraced this politics of endless inclusion and scratch that. They've embraced this politics of endless deference and limitless inclusion. So we have to serve everybody. We have to please everybody. Everyone is included. Everybody gets a contract, and everybody's needs has to be met. It's not more important that random small cities in Central California get rail than it is that we actually build what we said we were going to build, which is a connection between San Francisco and LA. It's the same problem really that's at the root of all of California's problems. I mean, you look at the homelessness issue where it's like, oh, we're just going to give money to a billion different NGOs all over the place and like they're going to fix it. And, everybody who comes here, we have to help everyone. And it's this just like totally incoherent system of governance that only works because California is so wealthy. In any other place in the world, like this would just completely collapse in and on itself. I actually compared the most absurd points of like Soviet bureaucracy favorably to like what California's construction, because at the end of it, at the very least, like you would end up with a product, like, you know what I mean? Like this is inefficient as like the Soviet Union was. At the very least, they could like build a train, but like California can't even do that. Like they literally, like socialism can like get you a train. Capitalism could get you a train. Californianism cannot build you anything.
I think so. If you want to build a train, high-speed rail from California, or you want to build high-speed rail from San Francisco to Los Angeles, you're going to make people unhappy. And I think maybe that's the weird thing that Californians don't know how to grapple with. Specifically, I mean, the governance of California doesn't know how to grapple with. There are going to be towns along that route that don't want the train there for any number of reasons. They don't like the look of it. They don't like the sound of it. They have some invented environmental grievance that they're going to raise. There are going to be towns that are not on that path that feel left out. As you also discussed in the piece, when they sort of moved it around.
Yeah, they take a detour into the fucking desert.
Right. So,
because there's like some suburb out there that like an LA county commissioner owns. So they're like, we have to just like reroute into this. Like,
I think when you say, you know, the problem is endless inclusion and deference, it's that is what, like, to successfully create infrastructure for the greatest number of people, you're going to necessarily make some people upset. You will never have 100% sort of a 100% yes vote from everybody. No American public infrastructure project would have achieved this, including things like the interstate highway system, for example. Like that wouldn't. There were many people who were opposed to that. The rail, the cross continental rail, which was private at the time, but like these things upset people. And in Florida, what you have is the support of the government. People were upset about the Brightline and continue to be upset about the Brightline. People are complaining about the Brightline right now. I saw it this morning because a bunch of people have been walking on the trains and getting killed. And they're like, we need to shut the Brightline down. And it's like, I mean, we don't. People should stop walking on the train tracks so we can have stuff in our society. Like we need to have public trains. People were upset in Florida every step of the way and continue to be so, and the government just supported the line.
They were sued by 2 different counties over like, and they did the same thing they did in California. It was like, we need an environmental study. It was one of the things, and then I think it was Indian River County sued because they said that the the way that they issued the bonds wasn't correct, and just all of this stuff that would like meant to slow it down and did slow it down to a certain extent.
Liz, what do you make of sorry, Riv, you want to wrap it up before I just have a question for Liz?
And I was just going to say, like, the difference between Brightline and California is that Brightline was like, okay, no, we're going to fight all of this in court. And California is just like rolling over every time anybody raises an objection.
Liz, what do you make of it as, I mean, an anarchist who doesn't believe in the concept of public goods? What do you make about what do you make of the dueling trains, Florida versus California?
Well, first of all, my main takeaway from this is just that I want River to like report out all of these types of stories because this was excellent reporting. It was really, really, really well done. And, you know, Reason produced a documentary on this, like a short 10-minute documentary on the Brightline project, and sat down with the CEO. And I frankly like would recommend both watching the Reason offering and then also reading River's account, because I think yours definitely comes down a little bit more critical, a little bit tougher on Brightline. But I think both are really useful, and it's a really fascinating infrastructure project. I do think your fundamental takeaway about like Californianism is so destructive, and especially that practice that has become so commonplace of rolling over and just taking it, just, you know, basically succumbing to the citizens' veto, the heckler's veto, and refusing to have ambitious projects. It is so obvious that California is squandering the upper hand that it had. You're right, like it is able to sort of coast on its wealth. But my question is like, for how much longer? You know, when we're already seeing crazy outmigration from that state, at what point does the coasting stop? And at what point do they have to stop biting the hands that feed? We also see this so much. I've been following San Francisco implementing that crazy like tax on, I guess, executives at companies where they make more than 100 times the median employee's salary in San Francisco. And one of the obvious consequences of this is that you have people leaving San Francisco. I've also studied a fair amount of like capital flight in Scandinavia, and like Norway has been jacking up their taxes lately, specifically on ultramillionaires and billionaires. And so guess what they do? They flee to Switzerland. What would you do in that situation, right? And so I think that to some degree, this is an underappreciated story that I wish more people would focus on, which is like, when you bite the hand that feeds, there are negative unintended consequences that result from that. I do think it's fair for you to throw some cold water onto the Brightline project and say like, look, what a bummer that the bar has been set so low in the US that is considered successful. At the same time, one thing that I do think is really interesting is that, Brightline is obviously private, but as far as I understand it, the ticket prices are sort of kept pretty low. And, the idea is that it's supposed to be affordable to people of all different income levels in Florida. So in order to take a 3-hour trip, you pay $20.
Mixed private public.
Well, no, it's like
Okay.
79 from
Okay, gotcha.
from Miami to Orlando. And I mean, that's something that some people have, that in the comments of my article, people were like, yeah, it's cheaper to just drive. I mean, I guess if you don't have a car, but I mean, I personally, as somebody who lives in South Florida, if I wanted to go to Orlando, I would probably just drive because it really, I mean, a round trip would be like over $150. So I mean, I don't know how economically feasible it's going to be, but
I realized I was looking at the kids' prices, but I should look at actual adult prices and not try to just traffic children across the state of Florida like a total weirdo. No, okay, fair enough. I do think it's interesting considering how will driverless cars change the equation for people? That sort of seems like this interesting thing where it's like, will Brightline essentially be obsolete or totally pointless, 10 years from now?
Well,
I don't know.
That is given Californiaism. Is that the word that we're using? It doesn't take root in the entire country and ban them pretty much everywhere. I think this is the next major war that we're going to see politically, at least when it comes to tech, post the antitrust stuff. Self-driving cars are coming. The experiments are already happening in San Francisco. People are already mobilized to stop them, and you're going to see this kind of come up everywhere you go. And I really would not be surprised if this became a major position in, you want to say Democratic Party politics, but you have Tucker Carlson coming out against self-driving trucks and things like this. This is a very populist right-wing position as well. I think there's maybe bipartisan consensus, at least at the extremes, to stop this kind of thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if they succeed.
I almost feel like we're being a little bit too nice to the state of California here, just in that, I don't think those $9.6 billion just disappeared into the ether. I think there's probably a vast bureaucratic structure of people who are benefiting and getting salaries from this money.
No, it's over 1,000. The way I put this, I cited an article too, because it's impossible to track down, I guess, without doing a FOIA, exactly where every dollar is going. But they do brag on their own website that the money was invested in the California economy through over 1,000 private firms. So this is basically just a massive giveaway. And for the people complaining that the Florida Brightline project isn't good somehow because a private company benefits. Private companies have benefited more in California because they've gotten $9.8 billion to do literally fucking nothing.
I think wasn't one of these organizations voted Employer of the Year or something? I just saw this link that Isaac shared in our chat. It seems not. It's so bad it seems not real, but that's California, man. It is the distillation of American luck. It can just lumber on with just the worst policy in the country. The resources are there and the people are there. Well, for now, as Liz mentioned. I'm going to give the last thought to you, Liz, before we wrap this week.
I was just going to say that I think it's super interesting that we will see with driverless cars and, to the extent that projects like Brightline get completed, this displacement of truckers, for example, and sort of lower skilled, but, and moderately paid workers. At the same time, we'll probably see a lot of AI displacing highly skilled laptop class workers. And then we were also talking earlier in this conversation about one of the unintended consequences or second order impacts from letting a whole bunch of immigrants in and drastically increasing immigration will be the fact that a bunch of working class Americans, including you cited Black males, River, and I think it's true, there will be lots of people put out of jobs. And so I think one of the most interesting things that we'll need to pay really good attention to is what are the political undercurrents that emerge from this time of rapid displacement, and how rapid will this displacement on both ends really be? will this be something that feels earth-shattering and quickly done, or will this be something that happens gradually with people feeling as though they have enough time to adjust? But I think how it happens and to which groups it happens will have massive implications for the types of politics that we have and the types of policies we pursue. So it's kind of like we're either fucked on both ends, or possibly we're in a time of like extreme innovation to come. And it's a matter of how we navigate these choppy waters. And I am fairly pessimistic based off of the debate from last night.
Well, on that note, we'll catch you guys here next week. And I promise a few more white pills. Thanks for listening, guys. And follow Liz on Twitter. Liz, what's your handle? Shout it out.
Liz Wolfe Reason.
All right. Later, guys.